So for this vlog, I thought I would pick my books for the week by spinning a colour wheel. I have a vague list of all the books that came up in my Tailspin TBR, which you can find below, and all the NetGalley arcs, all the recent releases, all the vaguely Halloweeny vibes, things I'm interested in reading at the moment. I'm hoping that I have something on that list for no matter what colour comes up, but we're going to see what happens. So for spin number 1, we are going to be picking and that's yellow. Yellow is not the colour I would have thought of necessarily for Halloween, but I'm sure we can make it work. We might have to go for quite a dark yellow, something closer to an orange, but I will have a quick look on my TBR and see what I can find. Okay, so the book that I have found is Slayers of Old by Jim C. Hines. Jim C. Hines is an author I have read quite a few years ago when he was writing fantasy. And this book is coming out towards the end of the month, so I have a NetGalley arc that I would really like to get to. There's not a huge amount of yellow on the cover, but those trousers are kind of mustardy, and I think that's as good as we're going to get, but also it's a book I really want to get to. Slayers of Old is pitched as Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets the Golden Girls. It is a standalone contemporary fantasy about a group of chosen ones coming out of retirement to save the world again. And I don't know if there's ever been pitch titles that made me more excited. So I am really, really hoping that this is going to be a really successful one for me. So we have a guest for our second spin. So white is probably kind of the exact opposite of a Halloween colour, but I still think you can probably get some good gothy vibes out of that one. The book that I found is A Treachery of Swans by A.B. Poranek. Now, there are 2 covers for this book and they have very, very different vibes. I'm going to be cheating a little. The UK cover, which I have, is kind of pink and purple with some kind of gold feathers on it. It has a very fantasy feel. The US version, which I actually did, has a much more dreamy, gothic, dark vibe. You can see there's this one. So I'm going to take this because I really, really want to. This was my most anticipated book of the year right at the start of 2025. It is a dark Swan Lake retelling with a sapphic romance, and I am so stoked to read this. Our third and going to be final spin. Another colour that is probably the least Halloweeny colour you could think of, we have pink. Although this year I have seen an awful lot of really nice pink and black Halloween decor, so maybe it fits that kind of trend vibe. The book I've picked is The Summer I Ate the Rich by Maritza and Maika Moulite. This is a YA horror novel about a Haitian girl using her zombie powers to exact revenge on the wealthy elite. Which vibes. Typically, pink would actually probably have worked much better for Treachery of Swans in the version I have, but I do love this kind of Barbie pink contrast with the pearls and the gold fork. I think there's definitely an aesthetic there. So I'll let you know what I think of this one. My ebook of the week is Slayers of Old by Jim C. Hines. This is one I've been really excited about. We have 3 main characters and the POV does switch between the 3. I would say our main character is Jenny Winters. She is in her 50s and in her youth, her teenage years, was a hunter of Artemis. She had a pact with this god and it was her job to hunt down monsters and evils of the world while being guided by a council of old men. She is very much the Buffy metaphor, obviously Jenny Winters and Buffy Summers. She is living in a house that is also a bookstore that she runs with her 2 roommates. We have Temple, who is nearly 100. He is a wizard. It's his family home and he has a special bond to this house, making the house almost, I mean, the house is essentially sentient and it has a connection to Temple that he's able to use to further his powers. As he's been getting older, the house is starting to maybe, the link's starting to dissolve a little, and we do see that he is very much a sorcerer that is past his prime, but is still trying. And then we have Annette, who is, again, she's somewhere, I think, in her 50s or 60s. She's a grandmother, but she is also half succubus. So she has powers over seduction and attraction. I was a little concerned about a man writing this kind of character, but I really love what Hines did. He does point out the consent issues and the coercion issues. Annette has struggled with all of her relationships in the past, but she can never fully trust that what they feel for her is real. But at the same time, Hines doesn't strip her of her sexuality entirely just because of the succubus issues or because she's an older woman. We do still get to see that it is a struggle in her part. She is doing what she thinks is right by avoiding using these powers as much as possible, but she does still feel attraction to people. She is still a kind of sexual creature in her own right as a woman. I thought was really interesting and really nicely done. I really liked the secondary cast and the world building and the vibe there. It felt very to me like maybe early to mid-season Buffy. So we have these demons and monsters milling around the town. They're just not known by the humans. We also get the idea that yes, there occasionally are monsters that are the bad guys, but there are also monsters that have been or are their allies, and there's also just neighbors that are monsters. Jenny has been a registered nurse, so she kind of provides medical services to a lot of the supernatural community. She has selkies that come to see her for skin conditions. She treats different monsters when they get injured. They're just there, fleshing out the world, which I really, really liked. We do get some insight into Jenny's past when she was in her 13 to 20 odd era, which is when she was a hunter of Artemis. We talk about a group of friends that helped her, so like the Scooby Gang. She had Felipe, who was kind of her watcher, and we very much get the sense that this is Buffy, who in her mid-20s has went, I've had enough. I am starting to see that all the monsters I'm being sent after aren't necessarily always the bad guys. I'm being turned into a weapon. My friends are being turned into weapons, and I'm done with this. I'm gonna go and live my own life. So the book overall feels like that comp title to Buffy, I don't feel like is just a marketing choice. It's a brilliant marketing choice because Golden Girls meets Buffy was what sold me. But as someone who was a massive, massive fan of Buffy and Angel, it feels like a love letter to all the things that were good about Buffy. I'm sure if you don't like Buffy, you've never seen it, you won't miss anything at all. But for people that have seen it, there's lots of cheeky references. The only thing I might have liked a little bit more of was the actual old age aspect. Because yes, we have Annette and Jenny are in their 50s, their 60s, but because they all have these powers, I get a little bit like we didn't always feel like we were reading about people who are the age they're meant to be, which was where my interest was in this book, being these action hero type characters years after the fact, now that they're in their older age. But you didn't get that because the supernatural element of them kind of counterbalanced it. They still felt as physically fit as someone in their 20s, late 20s, 30s, rather than 60s and 70s. I would have liked to have seen the ramifications if there had been one of Jenny's friends who was a human but would have been involved in this world but wouldn't have had powers. And while in their 20s and 30s or teens they might have felt relatively indestructible, you would get to see them now in their older age having to, what's it like to chase down a demon down a dark alley when you also have to worry about your hip popping, that sort of thing. I would have liked to have seen supernatural abilities they have faded more and seen them trying to outwit this bad guy and fight these monsters, etc., while not having all the abilities that they would have had when they were younger. Maybe having to rely on some cheap tricks and the practicality and occasional ruthlessness that can come with old age and experience. I think that would have just tipped it over for me. But this was a great book that I really, really enjoyed. I don't think it feels like it sets up for a sequel, and honestly, I'm quite happy there. But I would love to read more from Hines in the future, especially if he's playing about with more interesting, unique concepts like this one.
We went on a day trip to Largs and we took a wander down by the seaside. We managed to really straddle that summer-autumn divide this day. While the sun was out, it was pretty chilly, but we did manage to get some great Halloween-y type food from one of the local shops, including some pumpkin spice flavoured ice cream.
So the first book I've started for this week's reading is The Summer I Ate the Rich, and I've started listening to this one as an audiobook, which has been a really kind of interesting experience because we do have a single POV narrator for most of the book. We are getting Brielle's story in the first person, and obviously that is a single narrator. But there are also moments in the book which are called the Haitian Chorus, Brielle's five sisters, and they interrupt the story occasionally to offer their comments on what's happening, on Brielle as a person. It's not like a full cast audio where you have the different actresses or the different voices interacting with each other. I tend to prefer a single narrator. But this actually works because the Haitian chorus seem quite separate. So it does feel more like an interlude, and I have enjoyed that. I was a little bit surprised at the start. I had taken it from the summary, clearly, obviously wrongly, that the Brielle was, a teenage girl, and I took the zombie powers part to be that she could control zombies. Whereas in the first chapter, so there's no spoilers here, in the very first opening, it's actually that Brielle is the zombie, and her zombie powers are things like she has a really, really keen sense of smell. She's naturally gifted when it comes to certain types of cooking, butchery, things like that. And that just wasn't what I expected. So it's been a nice surprise and just something a little different than what I was expecting. I had visions of action-packed, her leading zombie armies to take out people. Whereas this is much more grounded, although obviously it's still fantasy. The horror feels much more grounded, it feels much more realistic and almost just a contemporary book. So I'm interested to see how that's going to escalate. At the moment, I'm sitting about the halfway mark, and I have to say there hasn't been much of what I would consider horror. This is YA, obviously, so I'm not expecting it to be super, super frightening, super gory. But also, I'm a real horror wimp, so if I think it's quite light on horror, then it's quite light on horror. Horror, I guess, is more in the everyday. Her mother works as a home help for a very, very wealthy patriarch of a pharmaceutical company. She's been working for them for, I think, about 15, 20 years. She's closer to him than his children are. She actually is suffering from chronic pain medical condition and needs medication for that. However, despite her working for this wealthy pharmaceutical company who actually produce the drug she needs, she's struggling to keep up her healthcare insurance, and she's actually going without the drug on occasion. And obviously that is the horror of it, I guess, is the horror of capitalism and the lack of caring on behalf of these men. So the horror has been more in the realities of Brielle's poverty and the contrast between that and this really, really wealthy family and how they kind of disregard her, rather than a lot of blood and guts or, gory zombie moments. One of the things that I am enjoying about it, I am enjoying it, but more just that I find it really interesting that it's something, or the lack of is something you don't see that often in YA, is that there's really not a romance plotline. Brielle has really important relationships. She has a best friend, Marcelo, who she seems to be really dedicated to, who is helping her with her business, which is another big relationship in her life. She desperately wants to be a chef. She's currently working on a supper club idea. Her mother's really against this. Her mother wants her to be a doctor or a lawyer, an accountant, and Brielle is she so desperately wants to be a chef. She's working on that with a level of drive that I just don't think most teenagers have. And then obviously there is the relationship between Brielle and her mother, which is a little awkward, which I love. It loves her mother dearly. She's making sacrifices for her mum because her mum is struggling with the insurance and the healthcare. But they also have this tension between them. It is still them against the world. It's feeling quite unique in that way. So that's something that I'm enjoying, even if the horror's not really horroring. I'm invested in the story because I really want to see how Brielle's conflict with this rich family is going to play out, and I'm really interested in seeing how she's going to go about and hopefully achieve her own goals and her own dreams.
So I said in the last update that I was really thrilled that this book wasn't going down the YA romance route, and more fill me, because the second half definitely is in romance as a big factor. Her new job, he's the youngest of the Banks, this pharmaceutical family, and we also get the exciting trope of the bitchy girl at work, the bitchy co-worker who tried to nip Brielle and Preston. So I wasn't massively impressed with that, I will admit, but and actually towards the end I was convinced that the authors were doing something quite smart with it. It's a nice balance, and I really enjoyed the way they played expectations for the romance and who we knew Brielle, and some of the plot aspects that had been laid in half, but I personally didn't see the book without giving too many spoilers. But I have to say, I enjoyed it. I think that zombie aspect came through, the supernatural aspect came through. I still don't think this is a horror. I still absolutely think this is maybe supernatural elements, but I definitely wouldn't go as far as to say it was a horror in any way. And I didn't get quite to do that bringing down the rich, bringing down the patriarchy type of thing that is mentioned in the blurb. I don't think it had quite the dramatic moment that I was hoping for or expecting. It probably is a more accurate, more realistic, more grounded take. But a bigger, more dramatic finale, whereas Brielle's to say about class division and racism and into both of those things, while having that really accessible for obviously teenagers, as it's a YA. I think I'm probably going to fall somewhere between the 3 and 3.5 kind of banding. Up a book from these authors again, but maybe going into it, no, this book had that feel despite it being pitched as fantasy horror. I would maybe have better expectations when I picked up something else by them. So I am about the 30% mark of A Treachery of Swans, and I'm really starting to get into it now. I was a little apprehensive, I think I said, because this was my most anticipated book of the year when it was announced back in January. I had a pre-order in, it came in June, and it's just not fit on a TBR since then. And I've been a little apprehensive. I don't know if anyone else gets that way, that when you really, really are looking forward to a book, you think it's going to be so completely you, that I almost haven't wanted to pick it up in case I end up being disappointed, whereas it's always there on my shelf if I hold off. But I have been really excited to read it. The first couple of chapters I struggled. I wasn't completely sure. I was not disappointed, but I was a little bit tense about it. There's a lot of characters, a lot of world building, a lot of French inspired naming conventions and things. And there was quite a lot to take in those very first chapters. Also, it begins with a theatrical setting. Odile is the adopted daughter of this theatre owner. He is trying to bring magic back to this land, and to do so he needs to steal the magical crown of the king. In order to do that, he has Odile steal not the body, but steal the appearance of Marie Adept, who is the prince's kind of childhood sweetheart. She's one of the nobility, one of the nobles in line potentially to marry the Dauphin. And so the plan is obviously Odile will take Odette's place, she will marry the Dauphin, and she will be able to steal this magical crown at the wedding. All of this happens in the first chapter, so there's quite a lot of setup. In their lives up till now, Odile has been sort of training for this moment by going undercover at the Palace of the Maid, by practicing her pickpocketing, her thievery skills, all while, I guess, to fund it, they run quite a high-class theatre. And the thing is, I tend not to enjoy books that are set in theatres or with actors. I don't know why, it just is something that I don't tend to enjoy. So when we opened in the middle of a performance, going backstage during one of these nights, I was a little concerned because I hadn't expected that in this. But very quickly we move on to Odile actually taking Odette's place and going to the palace, pretending to be this princess. It started to then get better for me there, because that's what I was looking for, was the royalty, the romance, all of that sort of thing. The other thing that, it's not a disappointment, it's just that my expectations weren't quite right, is that, again, I think I said when I picked this one up, this purpley pinky cover is the one that I have. This is the UK one, but the cover I prefer and the one I first saw was the US cover, and it has this kind of dreamy portrait of Odile and Odette, and I was really digging that gothic vibe. I was expecting really lush writing, maybe even slightly overblown writing, lots of description. I was expecting a slightly gothic, unsettling, eerie sort of air. All of that came from that US cover. And while the writing in this does have some really lyrical, beautiful phrasing, it is very elegant writing. That creepy, gothic, slightly unnerving, wintry vibe that I got from the US cover, I so far haven't seen come through. I actually think that, having read the first kind of few chapters, this UK cover is the more accurate cover in terms of tone and vibe. Which isn't a bad thing, it's just not what I was personally expecting, and probably what I personally would have preferred. But at the point I'm at, we have had things start to go wrong. There have been murders, there's been mention of almost shadow monsters. It could very well be about to take a darker turn. So I'll let you know how I enjoy the rest of it once I finish, and whether this lives up to being my most anticipated new release of the year.
And I have finished my third book. This was Treachery of Swans. And I'm gonna stick with my midpoint appraisal, where I personally prefer the American cover, that really romantic, soft, dreamy, gothic portrait. But I do think that this cover is maybe the more accurate to the tone of the book. Now, I did say around about the second half that we had a shadow monster appearing, and that shadow monster, the darker side of magic, the darker side of the characters, and the betrayals amongst them, all does ramp up in that second half of the book. So it moves more towards what I had expected from the US cover, but on balance, I still think that this one is more accurate. It didn't go as dark or as gothic as I expected, although it probably was darker and more gothic than most fantasies. Maybe even more dark and gothic than this cover suggests. I think maybe we're looking at a tone somewhere in the middle of the two. So, for my most anticipated book of 2025, right at the start, how did this one fare? How did it live up to that? Honestly, it didn't quite hit everything I wanted from it, but a big part of that was that I was looking for those really romantic with a capital R, gothic, dreamy, slightly eerie, slightly uncomfortable, slightly twisted vibes. And that was just never what the book was going to be. That was an assumption I'd made based on the cover. So I don't really think it's fair to hold that against it. And what the author does here is really, really good. It's really well done. It was romantic, it was an adventure story, it has forbidden magic, it has multiple queer relationships, it has toxic and supportive family relationships, but somehow I just wanted more from it. My copy here comes in at about 370 pages, and I think the hardback will probably come in a little higher, but I have seen editions that go as low as the 350s, which feels, as a reading experience, maybe closer to how quick I got through the book. I will say that once you get used to those French names, the terminology of the world, it is a really readable story. The writing is lovely and beautiful and descriptive, but I wouldn't say it's overblown. You're able to take in the story without feeling actively like you're reading. It is very well written, very smoothly written, very cleanly written in terms of its prose and its dialogue, etc. I do feel though that for the scope of the story that the author is telling here, which it does have a very grand, very wide scope, I think the book needed to be longer. I think we could have fleshed out almost every relationship here. We could have fleshed out the world building. We could have delved more deeply into the complexities of the politics and the magic. And I really do think that you could easily have taken this book up by another 100 or so pages without it feeling really bogged down or overblown. So ultimately, I'm coming in somewhere around a 4 here for this, and I'm a little disappointed in terms of the rating. Obviously, I'd hoped for a 5, but I don't think I'm disappointed in the book itself. I did really enjoy it. I had a great time with it. And my critiques are more things that I think would make the book even better rather than things that I think are wrong with it. So I still do feel like this is a really successful book, a really, really great retelling, and one that I'm going to be recommending to other people in the future. So how do my 3 reads stack up in terms of working towards my month's readathon goals? Well, the Summarize the Rich did brilliantly. It hit all 3 of my readathons. For ThisWitchReads, it fit for the Witch Hunt Trials, which is the very first square on the board. This was to read a book with a group that has been persecuted in the past. For Gothtober, it fit that recurring prompt to read a book by a BIPOC author. And for Halloween-a-Thon, I used it for Jiggly Jello, which was to read a book that prominently features food in some way. Slayers of Old got me the Familiars prompt with ThisWitchReads, which was to read a book that has an animal companion. I also used it for the Halloween-a-Thon prompt Raven, which was to read the book or watch a movie with some kind of black creature, either a cat or a raven, on the cover. And finally, a Treachery of Swans only filled a Halloween-a-Thon prompt because there are so many prompts for Halloween-a-Thon. I think everything's going to fill something. But this one was Crystal Ball that I picked, and this was to read a book that was a 5-star prediction. As to the rest of Halloween-a-Thon, the watch-along aspect, I have been having a really great time. I sat in on the kickoff sprints. The word there wasn't coming to me. The kickoff sprints for at least a couple of hours. I think the time zone wise, I was starting about 10 p.m. So I sat on to just after midnight. And then there was another productivity sprint already, which again, I think I hung about for an hour or two. And then there was actually a crafting night where it was more really relaxed, casual chatting with some ambient music going on. And again, I sat through most of that. So I really enjoyed the community aspect. For the movies that I've been watching, I've actually been watching movies, which I don't do as much as I watch TV, but for some reason it's just been kind of films that have caught my interest this week. I haven't watched any of the ones that were on my loosey goosey TBR to be watched, TBW, my bingo board. The best movie that I've watched so far this week was one that was completely just mentioned in the server. I'd never heard of it before. Which was called Cast a Deadly Spell, from 1991, but that's set in, I think, 1948. And it's very heavy on that noir detective vibe, but it's a world where magic exists and everyone uses it, and it's very open. And our detective is having to investigate a missing book. It gave me really strong vibes of either like the Dresden Files, but set in the 40s, is probably the easiest one to go with. But really specifically, it gave me the same vibes as Luke Arnold's urban fantasy series, which starts, I think, with The Last Smile in Sunder City. This movie just really hit that vibe, and I really loved it. The effects weren't great, but I had a lot of fun with it. It's a little bit dated, but I did really enjoy it. I then watched the sequel, and I did not enjoy that as much. The main character is recast, and the story just didn't feel like it fit in the same world. It didn't have that noir vibe. It felt very just made for TV. It didn't seem to really try and capture the essence of that detective era, whereas Cast a Deadly Spell was excellent. So I fully recommend that one if you're looking for something to watch for the rest of the month without going full scary horror. I hope you've been having a great reading month so far in October. I hope you're starting to get in the Halloween spirit if you want to, getting into all those spooky vibes. I still have a ton of books on my TBR for the month, and I'm really looking forward to finding out what I'm going to be picking up next. As always, I really appreciate if you've enjoyed this video and you stuck around. If you could leave a like, If you're interested in seeing what I pick up next, then please do subscribe to the channel. And if you stuck around but don't have anything in particular you want to say, then just drop me an emoji in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.